Chapter 8. Ellen was so happy she felt like shouting, Here I am at last!" And she could have shouted, too, and not have been heard at all with all the noise in the little town. The cries of cannoneers, the rumbling of wagon trains, the pounding of the heavy boots of marching men filled the air of Elizabethtown. And over it all sounded the drums, the screeching fifes, and the wailing bagpipes. She skipped down the street that ran beside the waterfront. One dock after another was filled with soldiers climbing from the boats and hoisting up their knapsacks. She looked eagerly at all the signs hanging above the shops and taverns that stood against the bluff on the opposite side of the street. Nowhere could she see a sign for the Jolly Fox Tavern. Ellen was puzzled. Grandfather said it would be here and not hard to find, for Elizabeth was a small town. She began to feel anxious and decided to ask someone. Carrying her blue bundle behind her, she walked up to a big ruddy-faced workman who had stopped his oxen by a dock and was loading his ox cart with wooden army chests. His huge muscles almost burst the sleeves of his woolen shirt. Across his fat stomach was stretched a well-worn leather apron. "Where is Mr. Shannon's tavern?" Ellen shouted above the noise of the drums and the bagpipes. "Must be here somewhere." The man's voice was as deep and rumbling as a foghorn. "It's at the sign of the Jolly Fox," Ellen shouted. "Jolly Fox Tavern?" The man wiped his hands on his shirt sleeves. "Never saw it here in Amboy." "Amboy?" cried Ellen. "Isn't this Elizabethtown?" "Nay, it's Perth Amboy." The man jumped up on his cart and started to push and pull at the army chests to pile them up. Ellen stared at him, speechless. Higgins had said their boat was coming to Elizabethtown. "Elizabeth is back there," the man pointed with his chin. "Back along the shore, about 10 miles or so." "But how can I get to Elizabeth?" Ellen cried in a high, frightened voice. "Swim, maybe," he laughed, "but walk, likely." In her alarm, Ellen felt as if her head were about to spin off her shoulders. She couldn't think, and she suddenly felt very hot. She must be in a nightmare. Grandfather had said there was only one thing to do when she got off the boat, walk to the tavern of friendly Mr. Shannon. He hadn't said she might have to walk 10 miles in the winter, when it was getting late and without knowing the way. When the man looked at her frightened face, he climbed down from his cart and bent over her so she could hear him clearly. "Stagecoaches go to Elizabeth," he said, "if you have money to pay." Of course she had money to pay. She had the coins in her pocket. "See the big inn yonder?" he said kindly as he pointed down the street. "See the fenced-in yard beside it? The stagecoach comes by there to pick up passengers." "Oh, thank you," said Ellen gratefully. In all her life she never had been on a stagecoach, but she had seen them rolling along the streets in New York. She would climb up and get a seat on top beside the driver, and she would ask him to stop in front of the Jolly Fox Tavern so she'd have no more searching to do. As she picked her way through the crowds that filled the street, she was surprised to see so many men who looked different from the familiar redcoats. Some had short plaid skirts and bare knees, and they marched to the tunes of bagpipes. Grandfather had told her they were British subjects who came from Scotland. Highlanders, he called them. But she stared in surprise at the other big men with hard faces under great heavy hats, who spoke in words she couldn't understand at all. They couldn't be British soldiers, for some wore blue coats and others green. "And yet," Ellen said to herself, "they have guns with bayonets and they carry knapsacks, so they must be fighting men." Carefully she edged her way past them, looking up at their grim faces and clutching her bundle tightly in her arms. She hoped none of them would notice her. "Why," she thought suddenly, "they must be the Hessians." She had heard about the terrible Hessians after the battles on Long Island. Everyone at home resented the German soldiers who hired themselves to King George to fight his wars for him. They had come over here to kill colonists for money. She ducked her head and darted past them. When she reached the inn, Ellen was dismayed to see that in order to get to the front door, she would have to cross a yard filled with the restless horses of the Hessian officers and the grooms who took care of them. She stood at the fence and tried to summon enough courage to walk to the door to ask when the next stagecoach would leave for Elizabethtown, but nothing in the world would induce her to go inside where the Hessians were. Since there was no sign of a stagecoach in the yard, nor anyone there she could ask, Ellen slipped quietly along the street beside the inn, where she spoke to the only person around who wasn't a soldier. He was an old man who was unloading firewood from a cart near the small taproom door of the inn. His boots were bundles of straw tied around his legs with ropes, and his hat had once been an animal of some kind, but it was hard to tell what sort now. The tail, which must have been bushy at one time, was worn to a scraggly rope. "Can you tell me where the stagecoach starts?" she asked. The old man turned around. He looked thin and tired, and his face was so gnarled it seemed to be made from a dried apple. Little bunches of gray hairs grew from his ears. He sucked in his wrinkled lips and squinted at her with sharp, beady eyes. "If you wait for a stagecoach," he said sourly, "you'll wait till doomsday." "Why?" Ellen asked anxiously. The man slammed 4 logs down on the ground before he spoke. "Because there ain't none." "None at all?" Ellen cried. "The British took them. Only officers ride in the stage now. No common people." The man angrily yanked more chunks of wood from his cart and swore at his old horse. "But how can I get to Elizabethtown?" "Can't." The old man spat a long brown stream of tobacco juice against the tree trunk, loaded the firewood on a shoulder, and shuffled on bowed legs to the taproom door. It slammed behind him. Ellen's heart fell to the soles of her feet. Her legs would no longer hold her up, and she sank down on a bench under the gnarled old tree beside the door. She sat so stiff and straight, she seemed to be carved from a piece of wood. Except for her twisting hands, she felt like a fly in a spider's web. She couldn't go on to find the Shannons, and she couldn't go back. There was no way to go home now. She couldn't even think. If only the noise would stop so she could think. There was so much shouting and playing of fifes and bagpipes it made her head whirl as fast as her mother's spinning wheel. Why had Grandfather thought she could do this? Why had he sent her off across the bay to a place she knew nothing about, with no way to get back home again? Why had he thought a 10-year-old girl could do a man's work? She stared at the company of Highlanders marching by in their plaid kilts and their bare knees, but she hardly saw them. Her thoughts raced around and around like squirrels in a whirling cage, round and round without stopping. When the old man came back, Ellen saw that someone had given him a chunk of black bread. He was gnawing it with his gums and gulping it down as if he were starved. He must be very poor to be so hungry. She jumped to her feet. "Why, I could pay him to take me in his cart." She was so excited the words tumbled out. "Look, I'll pay you more if you'll take me to Elizabethtown." She snatched the coins from her pocket and held out her hand. "Here, I'll pay you all of them." The old man looked greedily at the coins in her outstretched hand. Her fingers twitched as he reached for them, but at the last moment he put his hands behind his back and shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "But why not?" cried Ellen. "Elizabeth's north. I go west to go home. Hardly get there before dark as it is." Her hopes fell to her feet like a china cup breaking in 100 pieces. "I suppose I could walk," she said forlornly. But she knew she never could do that, not 10 miles all alone. When she had walked 10 miles before, she and Mother had kept each other company and given each other strength. "Can't walk on that road," cried the man. "That's a right busy road, out past the soldiers' camp. Lots of redcoats on horses. They'd run you down." Ellen remembered the officers on horses in New York. She was sure they'd run down anyone who got in their way. "Perhaps," she said stubbornly, "some woodcutter who goes north would give me a ride."
"Small chance of that," the man snorted angrily. "Nobody picks up strangers in these times."
He spat at the tree and wiped his mouth with a thin claw of a hand.
"Too risky to pick up strangers who might rob you or even kill you. Don't you know there's a war on, boy?"
"Yes, I know, but—" Ellen began.
"People around here used to be friendly, but no more."
He stopped his work and squinted at her.
"You're a runaway, ain't you?"
he said as he leaned over to look at her more closely.
"Better go back home, boy. No good running away now. Things are bad everywhere."
"I'm not running away from home." Ellen was so angry her brown eyes flashed and her words came out like hot sparks. "My home isn't here, and I must go to Elizabethtown. Can't you understand me?" The man stared at her in surprise and bewilderment. Then he shrugged and said,
"Well, can't be done. Not in these days."
He turned his back and bit off a huge piece of bread. All Ellen could see was the scrawny tail that hung from his cap. "Toliver!" she heard someone call out. "Hey, Toliver!" It was Higgins. The men from the boat were marching past the inn with their muskets on their shoulders. They seemed like old friends in this town full of strangers. "How you faring, Toliver?" Higgins cried out eagerly. Dow was marching by also. "Toliver!" she heard him shout.
"Hope the old gizzard likes squashed bread."
He gave her a big grin and marched on laughing. "Why," thought Ellen, "Dow thinks this queer old man is the friend who had the birthday. This funny old man with his toothless mouth so full he could hardly chew." Ellen started to laugh. Clutching the bread beneath her jacket, she ran to catch up with Higgins and march along beside him. "You're a mighty cheerful little scamp," he said as he smiled down at her. "I'm so happy to see you, Mr. Higgins," she said, laughing. She thought to herself, "Higgins is my good friend, even if he is one of the enemy." She felt funny thinking it, but it comforted her to have a friend in this strange and frightening place. "There are soldiers here wearing short skirts." She could hardly stop laughing when she thought of them. "Their knees are bare and their legs are hairy. I should think they'd be cold when the wind blows." Higgins laughed to see her so merry. "And there are Hessians, too," Ellen shuddered. "I know they are Hessians. They look so fierce they scare me." Suddenly she could feel tears splashing down on her jacket, and all her efforts to be brave broke down. She was laughing and crying at the same time, laughing and crying both together. What had happened to her? Higgins's kind dark eyes were filled with concern as he looked at her. "What's amiss with you, Toliver?" Ellen took a deep breath before she blurted out, "I wanted to go to Elizabethtown, and the boat brought me to Amboy instead." "So this is Amboy," said Higgins, surprised. "How far away is Elizabethtown?" he asked. 10 miles. "Whew!" Higgins glanced up at the sun. "Must be 3 o'clock. That's quite a march," he said. "But if you hurry, you'll make it all right." Ellen was running to keep up with him. "But I'm afraid of going by myself." "Being afraid is nothing to hold you back," said Higgins. "Just square your shoulders and start. Things aren't so bad after you start." He was fumbling in his pocket. "Hold out your hand, Toliver," he said, and he pressed a coin into her mitten. "There. Go get on the stagecoach, and you'll be there long before dark." Before she could tell him that she already had money in her pocket and there was no stagecoach, an officer on a big gray horse dashed up to her. "Be gone, boy!" he cried angrily as he flicked at her with his riding crop. "I'll have no boys begging for my men!" The officer roared at her. Ellen ducked, but the horse kept edging her over to the side of the road and turned so she couldn't dodge around him. She couldn't even see Higgins as he marched away. Very carefully she opened her hand to look at the coin, a fat silver coin, bigger than she had ever seen. And she couldn't even thank him for it. She might never see Higgins again, but she'd never forget him. He had given her something more important than money. He had been her friend. Now she knew she could do it somehow. Back to the old woodcutter she ran to ask the way to Elizabethtown. "I'm going to walk," she said to the old man. "I'm going to walk to Elizabethtown," she said again when he did not seem to understand her. He looked at her with a faint smile on his face.
"Well,"
he said as he gulped down the last of the bread,
"I did it myself many a time when I was young and had young legs like yours."
He took off his cap and scratched his head as he squinted at the sun.
"Must be nigh on to 3 o'clock, but it's a good road. You can walk it at night."
"At night?" cried Ellen. "I'm going to run most of the way to get there before dark. I've walked 10 miles before," she said to the old man. "I can do it again when there is naught else to be done." She sounded bold. She sounded like a person who could run 10 miles and never stop for breath. But inside she was trembling.
"Well, start running then,"
the old man said, and he turned his back to his firewood.